Welcome to Lesson 4, Lists and String Slicing. So the first big idea we're going to cover today is lists. So a list is a collection of items in a particular order. Since a list usually contains more than one item, it's a good idea to name the list with plural names like items, digits, or letters. We're going to give you an example of a list in just a second. But the naming qualifications use something with a plural. In Python, square brackets indicate a list, and each item in a list is separated by a comma. So here's an example of a list. A list statement is very similar to a variable statement in that it has the list on the left-hand side. It has an equal sign to start assigning values to that list. Remember, an equal sign in Python is not a mention of equality. It's not a statement of equality like it is in mathematics. It is simply a way to assign values to something, whether it's a variable or a list, or later on we have dictionaries also. So you have an equal sign, it starts assigning the values, and the items in the list, this list contains string values. They're all separated individually by their double quotes here, and each item is separated by a comma. Okay, so just notice for a minute, take a look at the syntax of the list. Each item is separated by its own individual string, and then we separate it by a comma, and we usually put a space here, even though the white space is actually not needed. Make sure that you are taking notes as we go along. When you ask Python to print the list, it will include the entire thing. It will print out the entire thing, including the brackets. So let's say that I have this list, I've defined it in line 1, and then I ask it to print it. And notice it's not going to print the word bikes because I haven't put bikes in quotes. I'm saying print what is stored in the list bikes. Find where that word has been mentioned before and figure out what has been stored in there. And so the computer gives me the entire list, and it gives single quotes around each string. Notice that. And then it gives, other than that, it's identical to what I put into bikes. Okay, the second big idea is index values. So when you have a list, each item has an index or a position. So we can say like the first item is, you would normally call it first, second, third, fourth item, but actually the computer weirdly starts counting at 0. So it will say that the first thing here, the first string in the list groceries, eggs, has index value of 0. The index value of apples is 1, milk is 2, and bread is 3. So again, it starts counting at 0. It doesn't start counting at 1. Okay, so the thing that you have to notice here is that when I make this list groceries and I ask it to print, I don't ask it to print the whole entire thing. If I wanted the entire grocery list, I would say it without an index notation here. But I'm telling the computer to print the first item in that list, or the item that has an index value of 0. And it is going to give me the word eggs. So you type the name. The way to access one individual item within a list is to type in the name of the list, and then right next to it, use the square brackets and type the index value that you want from the item, and it will output that item. So I could have said 1, and it would have given me apples, 2, it would have given me milk, and so on. Okay, so the question here is, what do you think this does? If I say, not only am I asking groceries 0, index value 0, but then I add the upper method with the open and closed parentheses that go along with that method. Okay, and if you said that it would print out eggs in uppercase, then you are correct. So notice you can attach this method to this single object here, which is everything that's in the 0 position index value of this list here. Okay, so this is the first check for understanding. You are going to answer in the Google form. That's on Google Classroom. You can check the link there. So what is the outcome of running this code? You have a list here, and then there's a print statement. What do you think is going to happen? Okay, and at the very end of the Google form, it will correct them all for you so you can check your responses. The third big idea is to not just get a single thing printed out, but actually to get a range of items within a list printed out, and so that's called index range. So let's look at this. So if we have groceries, was the same list that we had before, and we don't just put one item, we separate it, we don't just print out one index value, we separate it by a colon, and we say 3. So I'm going to show you what this looks like here. So we have it in Replit. So when I run this, this actually prints out eggs, apples, and milk. So one thing to notice, eggs is at index value of 0, apples 1, and milk 2. So the first number here indicates where you want it to start printing. You separate where you want it to end with a colon. Use a colon to put in the second number. This is where you want it to end, but notice it ends at the index value right before 3, which is 2. Okay, so let's go back to our lesson here. So, so what happens if you put a -1 here? Okay, so one thing I wanted to go back and note is that this first number is always included in the print statement, but the last range value here is exclusive. You're not including the thing at position index value of 3. This goes, I'm going to make a comment here, this goes from index value 0 to 2. So it doesn't include 3. Okay, so that's something that you should note. Okay, if I ask to print out groceries, and I want it to print out -1 here, okay, so it's weird because you're thinking, well, what's the thing that's at the -1 position? That doesn't seem like it would work out for the list, but actually what it does, and I'm going to put a comment here so it doesn't print out the first one, it prints out the item that's at the last position here. So it's almost as if it goes, it is as if it's going from the negative indicates that it's going in the reverse direction, and it's starting at the item that's in the first spot here in the negative direction. If I asked for the same thing to be printed out, let's see if -2 works here. So I'm going to run this, it gets bread, and then if I said -2, it would get milk. If I said something, so that would mean this would be -3 and -4. So if I said -4, it would get me the eggs position. And if I said -5, it would actually give me an error and say that this list item is out of range because there's not something in the 5th count going backwards. It only goes up to -4 in this situation. Okay? So one more thing to note is if you have a list right here, so this is a list of numbers. We've been looking at lists of strings, but this is a list of numbers. If you have something in here that you want to access, but you want to store just an individual value into another variable. So I have the list grades. Notice I pluralized it, and I have a list of grades. And I want to take one of those values out and store it in another variable. If I say my_grades equals the grade that's in index value of 2, so that notice that would be 100 here because you go 0, 1, 2, and then you say print out my grade. So this creates a variable called my grade that's equal to the third item in the list or something that's index value 2, and the output would be 100 if you say to print out what's stored in that variable. So you can take each individual item and store it in another variable by itself. Just notice that a list is a bunch of items, whereas in this case in line 2 I'm creating a variable that has a single item from that list. Okay, so here's check for understanding number 3. You have a list of famous athletes, and I'm asking to print out, and actually I'm missing my curly brace here. I'm sorry, I'm missing my rounded bracket here. So make sure that you actually put that into your notes into the check for understanding there. And then just go ahead and answer these questions on the Google form. Okay, the next big idea is called string slicing. Now, string slicing is using the same idea of index notation, but you're using it to access items in a string. So if I said print out my string 4, let's see what that does here. So I run it and it prints out F. Now that's because each item in a string also has a particular position. This capital T is at index value 0, then 1, 2, and actually the white space counts for 3. And so fall would be the item that's in the fourth index value here. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 would be the item in the fourth value. If I asked to print out index value of 3 here, it's actually printing out the white space, but it's a little hard for us to see. If I said print out 3 or 2 to 6, could run it and it would print out the E, F, and A there, because that's index values 2 to 6. And you can still do the -1 trick with string slicing as well. Okay, it's called slicing because it takes a whole string and it slices up parts of it and gives you back those parts of it. So it's the same idea as what you had before. Okay, so go ahead and answer this check for understanding here. So I'm storing a string in line 1, I'm giving it a string in line 2, I'm just storing one part of that string, and then I'm asking for line 2 to be printed here. Okay, so a couple more things. So just like we talked about before with the index value, you can have two items as you string slice. The first item is going to be to indicate to the computer where it starts. The next item is going to indicate where it finishes. And the last item is something called a step. And that's kind of like a count by item. So if I say go from 1 to 3 but count by 2, sorry, go 1 to 10 and count by 2, I would start at 1, and then I would go to 3, then I would go to 5, 7, and 9. So I'm counting the numbers 1 to 10, but I'm stepping by 2, or I'm adding on to it by 2. So let's look at this different code here. Okay, so we had, let me see if I skipped my my little replet thing here didn't, let's see, I have 2 to 7. All right, so let me just comment these things out. By the way, you can highlight everything and you use command ? Here. I wanted to run the code 2 to 7, 1, 6, and 2. So print my string, and I wanted to go from 2:7, and then I also wanted to print my string 1:6:2 and talk about those. So if I run those right here, 2 to 7 starts at value 2, so it's this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So it actually is giving me this little white space here, but it's hard to see. And then this says count from 1 to actually 5, because remember the second number is not included in the count, and it tells you to step by 2. So it goes from Y, and then it prints out T, because it's going every other one, and then N, and that's, let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, and it doesn't actually print out the white space here, because then that would be an index value 6. So again, the notation is the first one is included, the second one is excluded, so you can think of it as stopping to the one previous that, and that the third number is the step by. Okay, so I'm going to comment these out, and then I'm going to toggle the comments off of these by selecting them and hitting command ? So let's run these and talk about it. 0 to 4 works the same thing as 2 to 7 does. So 0 to 4 would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 to 5 is 2, 3, 4, right? But it's not the fifth one. I think I just, so this would go, this would actually print out 0, 1, 2, 3. This next one would print out 2, 3, 4. The next one, if you do not put a value on the left-hand side, then it starts at the very beginning. This is the same thing as saying 0 to 5. Okay, so you'll notice that it prints out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it prints out the same as 6, but includes the fourth value, whereas here it includes only the third value. If you don't put something at the right-hand side, it will go until the very end. So this one starts at 3 and goes until the very end. And notice it does actually include the end value here of the exclamation point. If you don't put something in the center, that's your finish number there, then what it's going to do is it's going to start at 4, go until the end, and print out every other one. So you'll notice that this one does that right there. So it looks like the one above it, except it's printing out every other one. It doesn't print out the N, it prints out the space, doesn't print out the I, prints out the S, and so on. Okay? And notice it doesn't print out the exclamation point because that would have landed on like the other one that it doesn't print out. And finally, if you ask it to start backwards, right? This one is going from the end to the beginning. So, and you don't put a number here, it's going to keep going till the very last one, and it's stepping by 3. So it starts here, it prints out the exclamation point, then it goes 1, 2, 3, prints out the fun, 1, 2, 3, prints out the I, 1, 2, 3, prints out the O, then it goes 1, 2, 3, prints out the Y, and there's no more in that count there. Okay, so I know this is kind of confusing, but we'll add this into your notes so that you understand. You are taking notes with this. You are adding the outputs here in that chart that you have in your note paper so that you can go back and reference this. You don't have to memorize it, but you should know how to get the result that you need from this. Okay, so the question is, this is the last check for understanding question, so go ahead and answer this question in the Google form. And that's the end of the lesson.